Hey, I'm Sarah Smith, family doctor, clinical day advisor, and the chatting coach. Welcome back to Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast, where we're going to be interviewing peers or world experts who can help us think about our clinical day in a way that is more sustainable and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today we have Dr. Pip Houghton with us. I'm excited to hear her story. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I love chatting about this topic, so I'm excited to chat with you about fair play, domestic labor, and all the mental load pieces that affect us as women and physicians and mothers and people.
Perfect. Excellent. Tell us a bit about you, where your journey, your medical training, and where you are in the world.
I am a family doctor, or in Australia, where you're located, more commonly called a GP. I have some additional training in addiction and perinatal mental health, and I'm just working on a certificate around child and youth mental health. I really lean towards that mental health side of things. I don't have my own practice currently. I mostly just locum around, sort of fill in the gaps where people need some extra support there. And then my sort of newer areas of interest is I've done a little bit of training in digital health and wellness. That's come out of working with youth and helping youth understand how their technology use is impacting their mental health and really all of us, not just youth. Then I recently, not quite a year ago, did some facilitator training in the Fair Play method. And Fair Play is a book written by Eve Rodsky around mental load, balancing domestic labor, and how to create space in our lives for joy and balance and self-care and all of these things that typically women they're doing in the margins on top of all the other things. And in particular in medicine, we're often so stretched in medicine that those little margins we have are often left for our families, and then there's nothing left for us. So it's a system to give people tools and skills to navigate tricky conversations in their households.
There you go.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Lots of different areas to poke and prod at. Let's dive into your interest in the domestic labor, the mental load, and the cost you're seeing for women physicians, because I think that's really valuable to our audience. So tell us more about what got you interested in this.
Yeah, like many people, including Eve, who wrote Fair Play, the interest came after my first baby was born. Like millennial couples to having children, my partner and I had what felt like a pretty equitable balance in terms of managing the things. But before you have children, there's things, but there's not a lot of things. After our first child arrived, we were having moments where we were having these repetitive conflicts over things like, why am I always noticing the laundry? And just stuff that comes up. And it was starting to feel like we were on repeat on this same cycle of the same conversations, the same arguments. And I was to myself, why am I feeling resentful when I have a very functional partner who does a lot of things and is a great dad? But I was feeling resentful that maybe he wasn't reading up on sleep schedules or registering for mom and baby yoga or little things. And then lo and behold, Fair Play came out, and it happened, I think I saw it on Instagram. And so I picked it up, read it, and I realized this is why we're having this. It's not that I have a partner who is incapable or not able to come to the table. It's that I'm carrying a lot of the behind the scenes work and he's doing a lot of the execution work. And it's that behind the scenes work that really bogs us down, that mental load, that ticker tape. I often say it's like having the 25 tabs open in my brain that I'm toggling back and forth between, and I can't keep track of. Read Fair Play. I have a husband who is very open-minded, very solution focused, I know I can come to the table and say, hey, this is feeling tricky. Can we talk about it? And he will show up with an open heart. Recognize that is not something that everyone has. I said, I've read this book. I would love it if we could talk through how to implement some of these strategies. And he said, great, let's do it. And so we did it. We started small. We ordered the card deck. We worked through all the cards. We started slowly reshuffling who was balancing what, really handing over full CPE, so conception, planning, and execution of full tasks, which meant when we use the example of meal prep, my husband likes to cook, but prior to Fair Play, I was still the one doing the grocery list and planning the meals and noticing if we were out of, milk. When we decided he was going to be in charge of everything related to meals, that required me to hand the card over to him and him to take full ownership of meals isn't just showing up to cook at 5:30. Meals is meal planning in whatever manner suits you. Meals means knowing what's in the fridge, making sure you have ingredients, making sure things aren't expired. It's doing the prep work, it's doing the cooking. And in our family, it's also doing the cleaning. That may differ in different families. That was just an example of us recognizing that he's going to own meals and he's going to take on all of that. But at the same time, I'm going to let go of groceries, right? And so that frees me of that mental load. But it also was a conversation with myself that if I want him to own this task, I can't micromanage, right? He has to be fully in charge. And so that's where we've gone with Fair Play. It's taken us in the direction of really having a clear sense of who owns which task, but also a clear sense of minimum standard of care for each task so that when we hand a task over, I was just at a conference last week, so I was gone for 2 days. And I know I don't even have to leave him a to-do list. He just knows what the minimum standard of care is for our home, for getting the kids to school, for meals, for laundry, and he gets it all done. I don't have to remind him about a single thing. And so I, as a professional, can go enjoy that conference with no extra mental load and just be really free to be rooted in that experience without micromanaging.
Now you've gone on to do facilitator training in this. Tell me more about that. How does that work?
The facilitator training came out partially because I enjoy the intersection of being a person in the world and how gender and responsibilities and career and identity all weave in to how we live our lives. It partially came out of wanting to make sure I had good skills to role model to my 3 boys. And it partially came out of having conversations like this with colleagues and me offering snippets of what's kind of worked for us as we read this book and we did the cards. And I thought I could do this with my colleagues in a more meaningful way if I had the tools to facilitate. I did the facilitator training last year and done a few podcasts. I'm just in the process of preparing a group coaching workshop that's up on my website and speaking at a retreat in beautiful Parksville in 2 weeks. That's growing.
Perfect. Tell me more about the things you've heard, the conversations you've had with women physicians, primarily. I guess that's who you've been speaking with, about what they're seeing in their lives. We've heard your story, which sounds like you've got a very responsive human in the house who's willing and able to take on some of these roles. What else are you noticing about these conversations?
I had a physician recently share that she works more than full-time, more than the average full-time schedule, often doing shifts from 4 a.m. until 4 p.m. So out of the house for drop off, pick up, all that sort of stuff. And her spouse is a stay-at-home spouse. And she was saying, I struggle to have conversations like this with my spouse. And I hear echoes from other physicians that my spouse is a really good dad. He is really good at doing the to-do list. And I feel like if I ask more of him, it's going to push him outside of his comfort zone. My spouse is a really good dad, and I still have to do all of the school communication. I still have to notice when the shoes are too small. I still have to change my schedule when a kid is sick. And so there's a lot of this push-pull of, yeah, my spouse is doing great. Most millennial dads are doing more than the dads that came before them. And we're still feeling like there's a bit of a gap and we don't know how to get to that place where we feel things are totally equitable.
Yeah. Tell us about you in your work day and a bit about what it took to do your work day and then doing some of the things at home before Fair Play.
Yeah, to be honest, we were in a fairly efficient Fair Play breakdown by the time I went back to work from my first maternity leave. I do often say that Fair Play isn't a one-time thing, it's an ongoing practice. Just like we practice medicine, you have to continue to practice Fair Play because life and seasons change on us. And so there's a lot of this push-pull of, yeah, my spouse is doing great. My spouse is a really good dad. He is really good at doing the to-do list. And I still have to do all of the school communication. I still have to change my schedule when a kid is sick. And so there's a lot of this push-pull of, yeah, my spouse is doing great. My spouse is a really good dad. He is really good at doing the to-do list. And I still have to change my schedule when a kid is sick. And so there's a lot of this push-pull of, yeah, my spouse is doing great. My spouse is a really good dad. He is really good at doing the to-do list. And I still have to change my schedule when a kid is sick. And so there's a lot of this push-pull of, yeah, my spouse is doing great. My spouse is a really good dad. He is really good at doing the to-do list. And I still have to change my schedule when a kid is sick. And so there's a lot of this push-pull of, yeah, my spouse is doing great. My spouse is a really good dad. He is really good at doing the to-do list. And I still have to change my schedule when a kid is sick. And so there's a lot of this push-pull of, yeah expectations change, needs change. My family just went through a huge move. My spouse has started a new job that requires 24-hour shifts. So we've had to totally reevaluate the way we run our home and the way we divide labor. We currently operate on a home duty, work duty parent situation where the parent who is on home duty is fully responsible for everything as it relates to the home. So when I'm at work, I don't take school phone calls or take school emails unless, of course, it's an emergency. I don't worry about getting kids to soccer or any of those bits and pieces. Even if I'm done at 5, maybe I want to join soccer and go watch, but it's not in my brain to think about how are we getting kids to soccer around prepping dinner. When my spouse is on home duty, that's on him. And when I'm on home duty, that's on me. And sometimes one of us needs support. So we call a family member, call a friend, or someone else to hop in and help. But we try our best to allow the person who is on work duty to be really invested in their work time and not be pulled into multiple spaces at one time, unless it's an emergency. And then, of course, we'll be there.
We hear a lot about the single mom who's married.
Mhm.
I'm hearing a lot about this sounds wonderful, but this is going to be a huge learning curve if my spouse is even going to be on board with this conversation. And even hearing you say, I went from knowing what's in the fridge, knowing the grocery list, knowing what sort of meals we'd be eating this week, but not actually necessarily doing the cooking part of it, and then handing that all over to your other spouse. That's a huge learning curve there for you and for, okay, I'm going to forget what's in the fridge and the cupboard, or not necessarily forget, but put that down.
Trust is it's trust, right? It's accountability and trust. And is part of the process. If you're going to have the conversation with your partner, is that we are agreeing and trusting each other to carry their task fully. And if each of us carries our task fully, the intention is that it frees up mental space and physical space for us both to do things that make us feel like whole people. And we hear all the time that women really struggle with intimacy, connection, and joy when they feel like they're burning down. And women feel like they're burning down everywhere, right? We feel like we are carrying too much, and we need our partners to step up and take some of that mental load, especially the background, unseen mental load that makes our brains feel like we're constantly on the ticker tape, right? And the benefit of that is more time together for joy, but also more time separately. You have more space in your calendars so that you can each pursue hobbies, each pursue self-care and exercise and connecting with friends, those things that made you fall in love with each other to begin with, that make you individual, unique humans. You free up the space and you can both be those people again.
See how working full time, having the lion's share of the home duties, mother duties, is really going to impact your ability to create sustainability for yourself. I hear a lot of physicians telling me they don't have time to exercise, to go out with their friends for an evening. What is a hobby? And this is an opportunity to say, if we share some of that load, we're going to get some time back. So this is about creating time for you. And we're going to hear a lot of people frustrated. I don't even know where to start. All day, I'm not only seeing patients and doing the things required of me at work, but I'm also trying to remember what time I got to pick up the kids and what I'm putting on the table for dinner, and if I got to go to the grocery store on the way home. You can hear the exhaustion.
Yeah, you can. You absolutely can. And there's another way. We can move forward differently. It does require our partners to be willing to step up and engage, which I acknowledge in some households is going to be more challenging than other households. And sometimes fair play is not the first tool you reach for in that setting. Sometimes there are tools that need to be worked on and built up first through skilled couples counseling before you can even bring domestic labor to the table. What I will say is, yes, it feels daunting to think, well, I'm going to pull out these 100 cards and we're going to reassign all these cards in a day. Start with one card. Garbage is a great one. Pull out garbage. How are we tackling garbage? It's important to remember when we're working with our partners that we've grown up in different families of origin and we've observed different ways of being in a family. And so garbage could look totally different to two different people. In one person's family, taking out the garbage could mean tying up the kitchen garbage and leaving it at the back door until the morning. And that could be a completely reasonable way to handle garbage. In someone else's family, garbage could mean you take out the kitchen garbage, the diaper garbage, and it goes straight out to the bin on the driveway. In other people's families, that might include also changing the bin liner, wiping out the bins. There's a whole variety of ways garbage could be executed. And it seems so silly. It's just garbage. But if we extrapolate that to every single task in our household, it might be that the reason you're having conflict isn't because your partner's trying to antagonize you. It might just be that you've had different role modeling and you haven't agreed on your own minimum standard of care together. What I would suggest is if it feels overwhelming, pick one thing. Maybe it's backpacks in the morning, right? And so here's a way to free up space right away. Trade off who's in charge of backpacks. When your spouse takes backpacks, they are going to be fully in charge of backpacks at the door, lunch gets in the backpacks, shoes by the back. Decide what minimum standard of care looks like. And when your spouse is on backpacks, you walk away, take an extra long shower, go for a quick run around the block, do your makeup extra fancy, whatever it is. That may have freed up 5 minutes of time. Maybe it's 25. For me, backpacks in my house, 25 minutes at least, right? 3 boys out the door. If we can trade off those small little tasks and slowly add 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, and see small successes with small tasks, then we can build that out to bigger things, managing the emotions of extended family, right? We don't need to start with a big one on day one. Start with something really small like garbage or backpacks or dog walking and build it out.
Yeah, what I'm fascinated by is there's 100 cards. That's 100 different tasks that perhaps when you initially do, and it may not be your household. You may talk about other families that you've heard about. When you take these 100 different mental pieces of managing a household, what do you see as an initial distribution? If you put the pile that I'm handling, the pile that you're handling, what are we seeing? What do you think that distribution looks like before we get started with messing around with who's taking on what?
It's going to vary depending on every household. And the point is not that your stack of cards be equal. It's about being equal with each other or being the same as your neighbor. It's what feels equitable in your home. And that's going to depend on so many things. If you're in a family system where one person is the primary stay-at-home parent, it's reasonable that probably they are going to carry more of the daily grind tasks because they're in the home more often. That doesn't mean it's always theirs to carry all the time. That person still needs a break, and there still has to be time where those tasks can be easily transferred to someone else. The first step with those cards is you take them out of the box and first just pull out the things that are relevant to you. Not everything in that box is going to apply to everyone. Not everything in the box is important to everyone. There's a card called Magical Beans, and that's tooth fairies and Santa Clauses and Easter bunnies and all those things, which matters in some families, does not matter in others. You go through your card box first. No one should be playing with a full deck of cards. Eliminate as many as possible first so that you know which balls you've got in the air. And then again, start small. I find it easier to just start with one card, practice having that minimum standard of care conversation, and then practice determining who's going to be in charge of that card for a week. See how that feels. And then next week, add another card. You don't have to start this with splitting up the whole deck. And in fact, that even to me feels quite overwhelming.
I'm just wondering how many actually had the whole deck to begin with.
In some families, truly, sometimes the female partner is carrying most of the deck and the male partner. I think the consistent card that most male partners carry is garbage. And then maybe there's others, but I think Fair Play has some statistics on the most consistent card carried by male partners is garbage. So we want to try and get a few. They're very capable. Get a few more cards in their pile.
Is there any role for children taking on some of these responsibilities?
And I think the younger you get kids involved in this conversation, the easier it is. And speaking of, you mentioned single but married parents, but honestly, single parents, get your kids on the fair play bandwagon early because you don't want to be noticing all that stuff as they get older. So we want to try and teach them. One of the common ways we're teaching kids, and you'll see it come up on the internet a lot, is to notice and do. And this is basically what we want our partners to do as well, is not just to do, we want them to notice and do. And with our littles, you choose age appropriate tasks that they can notice and do, and helping them understand that by narrating. Often my kids are 7, 5, and 3. So if I walk into a room and it looks like a bomb's gone off and all the toys are everywhere, I'll walk in and say, "Oh, I'm noticing that it's almost 5 o'clock, which is our usual cleanup time. And I'm noticing that there's toys everywhere. So what I'm going to do is start putting some toys in the box, and then I'll put a few in the box, and then I'll walk away and see what happens." Sometimes they follow suit. Sometimes they don't because they're children. My oldest is just starting to get interested in preparing his own food, trying to put peanut butter on bread and that kind of thing. He's 7, so it's not great. If I'm making my own food, I'll sometimes narrate what I'm doing. I'm making the sandwich. I'm noticing that I've put the peanut butter on the bread, so I don't need the peanut butter out anymore. So I'm just going to take the peanut butter and put it back in the fridge and just role model that process. We try to stay away from a very task-oriented to-do chore list with them and try and really foster that pause, go into that room, do a 5-minute notice and do, and just see what they come up with. And then really reinforce the positives. My oldest often will notice that the dog hasn't been fed without being asked. And we try very hard to reward and acknowledge and say, "Thank you for that notice and do. You did a really good job."
So we're almost training their mental awareness, their mental load to start early rather than a tick box task list.
Exactly. There's a place for a tick box task list. Absolutely. As they get older, we don't want them relying on us to tell them what their chores are. We want them to be able to notice what the chores are and get them
But I
done.
think we get a lot of that resentment of, I don't want to write him a list of things to do. I want
100%.
him to just notice and do.
Exactly. Exactly. And with the kiddos, the concept is notice and do. But if you're in a place where this would be very new for your male partner, treat it like a notice and do with your partner as well. Give your partner grace. If your partner has never been asked to notice and do, they probably don't know how. Their family of origin, their role modeling may be such that someone has always created a list for them. And so they haven't had the opportunity to learn the skill of noticing and keeping track of and remembering. So if we can approach our conversations with this generous interpretation of, my partner loves me, they're not there to antagonize me, and they haven't learned this yet, so let's learn it together, you'll probably have more success.
I guess the skills that we're building here in our homes with our children, we're now, so you're saying it's not that we're going to be taking on the parent role for our spouse, where we accept them as an adult and we chose them for a reason, but the skill of notice and do may not be inherently present for household tasks. I'm just thinking about within our, have you seen this at work as well, that you start that notice and do now with medical members who may not necessarily have that anticipation of tasks?
The retreat I'm speaking at 2 weeks with my colleagues from Revive Physicians, Dr. Power and Dr. Leah, they're doing a whole workshop on how to manage mental load in the workplace and some of these issues of taking initiative and noticing. And the skill set applies to the workplace as well, perhaps in a slightly different tone, starting from the perspective of, we don't necessarily all notice the same way or to the same capacity. That doesn't mean we're not capable, but sometimes it does start with that shared conversation where we come together. It's managing the inbox, the labs, the results coming in. How are we going to notice that results need to be checked? And what is our minimum standard of care for who's handling that? What timeliness are we responding? How do we book the patients in? And it's sort of like your policy and procedure manual. It's establishing a minimum standard of care. And then we have to be willing to allow people to take that on themselves without micromanaging. Set a time to review. So maybe in 2 weeks we touch base, see how it worked. And then that would be your time to offer feedback too. So if things didn't go so well, we problem solve. Ideally, in a time where emotions are low, cognition is high, we can have a solution focused conversation.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, that sounds good. So these are principles that we can take beyond the walls of our homes. We can start to
absolutely.
potentially have it as a new way of discussion with our medical teams. And we can potentially use it as a way to feedback that's less confrontational, perhaps, because we're doing it in a goal-orientated way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Love that. Is there anything we haven't spoken about that we should be talking about?
I think that what I love the takeaway to be around this teaching is that it's not about one person following another person's rules or standards. It's about both of us coming together to determine a mutually acceptable standard so that both people and your little people, if you've got kids at home, have equitable access to joy, personhood, self-care, exercise, time with friends, and that's what makes us whole. That's what allows us to be sustainable in medicine. If we lose ourselves, we burn out, and women drop out of medicine like flies. Like within 6 years of finishing residency, women are cutting their hours down by 50% or more. If we can maintain our personhood, we're protected from burnout in the workplace. If we can maintain our personhood, our ability to be sustained in our relationships is also protected as well, right? You hear often what happens to moms in particular when their children leave the nest. They don't know who they are anymore, right? Depression, anxiety, feeling lost, grieving. Of course, we're all going to grieve when our kids leave, but we still need to know who we are. We need to know what our personhood is. And if you wait until they're 20 years old and going to university, it's too long.
Mhm.
What I love about this system is that the point isn't to walk away with a new to-do list. The point is to claim space for both of you to
Mhm.
find your personhood and be whole.
I love that. I think that the other possibility of this is that we've created 100 rules that somebody's might want to enforce on the other person about you're on garbage this week and it's not at minimum standard, or you're on meals this week and there's no X, Y, Z in the fridge. A way to just continue the arguing and the confrontation and the rules in the household. It's nice to hear that it's not that.
Not the intention. I can see how it could become that. And what I would say is if your relationship is a safe place where you can have problem-solving conversations, approach those perhaps missteps from a place of curiosity as opposed to a place of anger. And I'm saying this fully acknowledging that I don't always approach with curiosity because we're human. But if there's no groceries in the fridge, try to take that deep breath and then offer, hey, you're on meals this week. I noticed that you're planning to do this, but we don't have X in the fridge. Just wondering what happened. Or leave it, see what happens.
Mm.
Last minute grocery run. But the intention is not to oversee someone and slap them with a giant to-do list. The intent is to be a collaborative system that solves the problem of domestic labor together.
I'm really thankful for this conversation because I think it's something that it's not necessarily pulled into these types where we're talking about the parenting and the partnership and the responsibilities at home and the mental load of being somebody other than who you are at work. But
Mhm.
a huge contributing factor, like you said, to both burnout and frustration and overwhelm and
Mhm.
discussion and other reasons that people are super stressed at work is not necessarily all work, but there's
Mhm.
so much more that people are doing beyond the walls of work.
Mhm. So much. Yeah.
I'm so grateful that we've got some ideas in the world of how can we make this a little easier, a little better, a little nicer for you and your brain and your world.
Absolutely.
Thank you. How can people reach out and find you?
I have a website that's still in the early days of setup, but I'm at timeoutmd.ca. I am working on some workshops for women in medicine in particular at the moment. At some point, I might expand that to other areas of healthcare, but right now I'm just focusing on female physicians. I am speaking at a retreat in a couple weeks in beautiful Parksville, BC, and I believe there's still spots available. If you wanted to look at the Revive Physician Retreat website, I can send you the link for the show notes. And I'm sure other things will pop up along the way.
You'll have a great time at Revive. I have not actually got to get there in person previously, but I absolutely love what they do and their mission and the women who run that. So fantastic.
They're a good team. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Pip, for being here, and you all have a wonderful rest of your week.
Bye.
Hey, if you found this podcast episode helpful, I would encourage you to like and subscribe. Every time you do, you help a colleague or friend find our podcast, and it can help them too. Don't forget to share it along with your friends. If you're looking for extra help, don't forget we have Charting Champions for physicians and Smarter Charting for nurse practitioners and other clinicians to help you get home with your work done. We are helping you create sustainable clinical medicine. Thanks for listening.